How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to be reading from Stephen Houlgate's text on sense certainty. So here we go. Chapter 3. The phenomenology is meant to show how the experience of consciousness takes it from the standpoint of sense certainty to that of absolute knowing. Hegel understood this development to be driven forward by the logic that is inherent in the experience of consciousness, so driven forward by the logic. In what follows, I have concentrated on trying to make this logic as clear as possible. I have thus said very little, indeed almost nothing, about the historical phenomena that correspond to the various shapes of consciousness that emerge. I hope, however, that my approach will help readers of the phenomenology understand why Hegel thought the development he describes is necessary. They will then be in a position to assess for themselves whether the phenomenology succeeds in fulfilling this specific task Hegel set for it. Sense certainty, in Hegel's view, is natural consciousness in its simplest and most immediate form. It takes its object to be there before it immediately and thinks that nothing of the object is hidden from view. It believes that it has before it the sheer being of unalloyed immediacy of the thing. It takes itself in turn to know such immediacy immediately. It does not know its object by means of concepts, but takes itself to be directly acquainted with it. Sense certainty, Hegel writes, is, quote, immediate knowledge. Itself a knowledge of the immediate, or of what simply is. Such certainty is sense certainty because it takes its object to be immediately given to the senses in space and time. It sees and hears many different things. Indeed, it confronts an infinite wealth for which no bounds can be found. But it takes each thing to be given to it here and now, in its immediacy. Accordingly, sense certainty has always has something quite specific in view. It sees this night, this day, this house, or this tree. Yet it does not identify its object explicitly as a house, rather than a tree, for to do so would be to understand it by means of a contrast with something else, and the object would thus not be known immediately. Sense certainty sees this house and is aware that it is not this tree, but it does not focus on the difference between the two things. It attends directly to the immediacy of the thing for it. It thus does not say this is a house, nor a tree, or even merely this is a house. All that it says about what is known, it knows, is just that it is, and its truth contains nothing but the sheer being of the thing. Indeed, sense certainty not only says no more than this, but also has in mind no more than this. Such immediate consciousness of the specific is something we are familiar with in our everyday experience. We share in it whenever we say or think we are conscious of this. In ordinary usage, the word or thought "this" is meant to focus the mind on a specific individual, as in, look at this. But it is meant to do so directly, without the interference of mediating concepts or descriptions. Sense certainty, which claims to be immediate consciousness of the specific, thus necessarily thinks of its object as simply this. More precisely, since it takes its object to be given in space and time, it thinks of it as this here now, this here, or this now. Furthermore, such certainty takes itself to be no more than this immediate consciousness of this, I. It takes itself to be a specific individual, one among many, but it does not differentiate itself explicitly from other I's by giving itself a name. It thinks of itself simply as this I that is immediately aware of this object. In Hegel's own words, consciousness is I, nothing more, a pure this. The individual consciousness knows a pure this, or the individual. In the introduction to the Phenomenology, Hegel writes that in what consciousness affirms from within itself as being in itself, or the true, We have the standard which consciousness itself sets up by which to measure what it knows. We can now see clearly what sense certainty affirms as the true, what it first takes its object to be. That object is not the play of forces or the world of spirit, but simply this here now, in its immediacy, specificity, and uniqueness. The task of phenomenology is to trace the experience that is generated by this object and to discover whether this object is preserved in the experience of it. The first experience of sense certainty, the now. In his science of logic, Hegel maintains that there is nothing in heaven or in nature or in mind anywhere else which does not equally contain both immediacy and mediation. Yet, unlike, for example, Adorno, Hegel does not draw on this philosophical insight in order to challenge the idea that one can be immediately aware of the immediacy of what is before. Phenomenology, in Hegel's view, must set all philosophical conviction to one side and undertake an imminent examination of the experience undergone by sense certainty. It must seek to discover, therefore, where such certainty is led by its own conviction that it beholds the immediacy of this specific thing. At the start of his examination of sense certainty, Hegel proposes a simple experiment. He asks sense certainty what it is aware of. What is the this? Or more precisely, what is the now? To this question, Hegel says we ourselves answer. For example, now is night. We have to give this answer on behalf of sense certainty because it does not identify its object as the night, but takes it simply to be this now. We then write down this truth and keep it until it is daytime. We then look at it again and see that it is no longer true, since it is no longer night but day. We are forced to conclude, therefore, that this truth has become stale. This experiment seems curious, since it does not initially appear to demonstrate anything that sense certainty would find problematic. After all, sense certainty never claimed that it would be true to say, it is night during the day. It becomes clear from 96, however, that Hegel's real aim is to show not just that what was written down becomes stale over time, but that as night gives way to day, sense certainty actually remains conscious of the very same thing. Sense certainty is conscious of this now without further qualification. It sees the night and thinks it has this in mind in all its specificity. But it does not further identify its object as the night to itself or anyone else. All it has explicitly in mind is the thought, this is now before me. This means, therefore, that it is explicitly conscious, not of its objects being the night, as opposed to the day, but simply of its object being now before it. This consciousness, however, remains as night gives way to day, for in the day, just as at night, sense certainty is consciousness of its objects being now before it. Indeed, this remains the case, whatever sense certainty encounters. What sense certainty is explicitly conscious of, therefore, proves to be wholly universal. It is, of course, not meant to be universal, because in being conscious of this now, sense certainty thinks it has in view the unique specificity of the thing. Through the simple passage of time, however, sense certainty learns that it has nothing specific in view after all, but something quite indeterminate and universal. The being this now before me that can belong to anything. The result of Hegel's analysis is not, by the way, that we can never be conscious of the specific thing. Hegel claims that claims, in the words of Robert Stern, is that nothing we can know about the object is unique to it, if we stick just to sense certainty. The specificity of things eludes sense certainty because it refuses to identify them explicitly, but thinks of each purely as this here now. And it does that because it thinks that in so doing, it will have in view the undiluted immediacy of the thing. Sense certainty's concern for immediacy is thus what cosigns it to utter indeterminacy. Language or time. In 1839, 8 years after Hegel's death, the young Hegelian Ludwig Feuerbach accused Hegel of playing a verbal game in his analysis of sense certainty. All Hegel shows, Feuerbach claims, is that the words here and now do not specify the objects to which they refer. In Feuerbach's view, this shows the limitations of language, but not of sense certainty itself. Even if words fail us, sense certainty is perfectly conscious as sense certainty of the specific character of things. Feuerbach's charge appears to gain support from Hegel's claim that in sense certainty we do not envisage, vorstellen, the universal, this or being in general, but we utter the universal. In my view, however, this appearance is misleading. Language is not itself responsible for the indeterminacy and universality that comes to afflict sense certainty, but it reveals the indeterminacy and universality in the very consciousness of this here now. Hegel maintains that the universal is the truth, das Wahre, of sense certainty, and language expresses this truth alone. This suggests not that language causes the problem besetting sense certainty, but that it expresses the truth that emerges below the level of language in sense certainty itself. In my view, the object of sense certainty proves to be the universal, because such certainty is immediate sensuous certainty and so takes its object to be spatio-temporal. As such, the latter is understood to be a now and a here, connected to other moments and points. If per impossible, there were only one moment for sense certainty, then the consciousness of this now would clearly hold in view that moment alone. For sense certainty, however, one moment in time and one point in space leads to another. Yet sense certainty always takes itself to be conscious of this now, of its objects being now before it. Accordingly, as one moment gives way to the next, this now continues to be the object of consciousness. As Hegel puts it, the now preserves itself in its continuing to be the object of consciousness in being preserved. That the now becomes something universal. The now first comes to be a universal not in being uttered in language, but in the passage of time from one now to another. The now is initially taken by consciousness not to be universal, but to be something quite specific. This now before me. As one now gives way to another now, however, the now is preserved as the object of consciousness and so comes to be something universal, something that is encountered, not just now, but also now and now and now. The universality displayed by the now thus has a distinctive character, since it emerges in and through the vanishing of one moment into another, the vanishing of night into day and day into night. The now is not immediate but mediated. This is because it is determined as a permanent and self-preserving now, through the fact that something else, vis-a-vis day and night, is not. At the same time, it remains a simple, indeterminate object of consciousness. This now with no further qualification or complexity. As such, it remains the object of consciousness, whatever example is at hand. As Hegel puts it, the now is indifferent to what happens in it. Was noch bei ihm verspielt. Indifferent to whether it is night or day. Note that this simple now does not transcend the individual nows that vanish and arise, but continues in and through them. The now, in Hegel's words, is thus a simple thing which is through negation and which is neither this nor that, and not this, and is with equal indifference this as well as that. And this structure marks it out as a universal. It is moreover an abstract universal because it is utterly indeterminate. Before we move on to consider the second experience of sense certainty, two further points need to be made. First, although 95 suggests that sense certainty undergoes its first experience only because we write something down and show it to such certainty later in the day, this act of writing is not central to that experience. We do not bring about the dialectical transformation of the object of sense certainty into an actual universal by our act of writing down what sense certainty is aware of, as becomes clear in 96. The work of writing is done without any activity on the part of the phenomenologist by time itself. All the writing down achieves, therefore, is to show sense certainty the consequences of the temporality to which it knows itself to be subject. The first experience of sense certainty thus remains quite imminent. Indeed, in my view, the whole experiment of writing could be dropped without detriment to Hegel's account. paragraph on writing could be deleted, and all one would need to say is this: sense certainty is aware of this here now, but time moves on from sense certainty itself. The now is nonetheless preserved as the object of sense certainty, and so proves in the experience of consciousness itself to be universal. Second, it is we phenomenologists who call the emergent object of sense certainty a universal. That technical term is not employed by such certainty. Nonetheless, the object comes to have the structure of a universal for sense certainty itself. Sense certainty has demonstrated in its own self and hier selbst that the truth of its object is the universal. Sense certainty itself, therefore, experiences the transformation of its object and the loss of the object as it initially takes it to be. In this way, both sense certainty and the reader are educated by this first experience of consciousness. Both see that the object, as initially conceived, itself generates the experience in which it proves not to be what it is first taken to be. The initial object is not, however, simply replaced by a new object. The object remains this now, but that very object, this now, proves in the experience of it to be indeterminate and universal rather than specific, and so proves to be other than it is first taken to be. The analysis of sense certainty, to begin with at least, thus conforms to the method of phenomenology set out in the introduction. For the initial conception consciousness has of its object is undetermined and subjected to an imminent critique by its own experience. By the way, though I have concentrated on the now, consciousness of this here is subject to a similar dialectic. Hegel describes this dialectic in these lines, which I shall leave to speak for themselves. Here is the tree. If I turn around, this truth has vanished and is converted into its opposite. No tree is here, but a house instead. Here itself does not vanish. On the contrary, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree, etc., and is indifferently house or tree. Again, therefore, this shows itself to be a mediated simplicity or universality. End quote. Okay, I need to go to the gym. I shall see you next time.